sake of time. So hello, everyone. My name is Nicolette Cabell, and I'm the Recruiting and Community Development Associate here at Inspiring Capital. Really excited for everyone to be joining with us today. The session is currently titled Demystifying the NPS BPI Case and Interview Process. And with that said, I'm actually going to hand it over to our guest speakers.
All right, thank you so much. My name is Stephen. I work at the National Park Service. I am here with my colleague, Rachel. I'll let her introduce herself in a second. We partner with Inspiring Capital to operate this business plan internship program. I've been with the Park Service since 2016. I graduated from grad school in 2015. No, that's incorrect. I'm off to a bad start. I graduated from grad school in 2016. I joined the Park Service right afterwards. I did the BPI program in 2015. That's the date I'm looking for. So I am a BPI alum, went through this whole interview process myself, and now I'm looking at it from the other side. So really happy to have you all here on the call with us today. We can talk a bit kind of a broad overview about BPI and really dive into the questions you have about this application process and the interviews and whatnot. But before we dive in, Rachel, do you want to give a brief overview of your background?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Rachel, and I work with Stephen at the National Park Service. And I am also a BPI alum. I was a BPI alum in 2018. I finished grad school in 2019 and was able to join the National Park Service and this team in that same year, which was really wonderful. And I will help demystify the interview process for you today. Looking forward to sharing stuff and answering your questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Rachel. And what's clear is once you do the program, what's more important is your BPI year than your grad school stuff. That becomes your defining characteristic. All right. So really quickly, hopefully everyone who is on the call is at least a little bit familiar with the BPI program. There's a whole ton of stuff on the Inspiring Capital website. Check that out for more information. We've done a whole series of webinars and panels. But just to kind of get everyone up to speed, real quick 30-second pitch, the BPI program we offer in cooperation with Inspiring Capital. We attract top quality grad students to serve as paid management consultants for the National Park Service. So it's an 11-week program. You get a week of training. Then we pair you up in groups of 2 or 3, send you off to live and work in your project site for the next 10 weeks. So you get hands-on management consulting experience. I think that's a really huge piece of this. You are definitely solving a real world problem and briefing NPS leadership at the end of the summer about your findings and recommendations. So you get really get a chance to put some skills into practice. Right there, the program dates June 5th to August 20th. So those are pretty firm dates. Every once in a while, we'll have people who are taking exams or something during that training week. It starts the 5th. We're comfortable with that. If you have any questions, just kind of reach out about those logistics. And again, for more information, visit the Inspiring Capital website. All kinds of information there and more. I assume you've been there already because you're on this call. So that's the good news. Great, so just a quick agenda for today. I'm gonna cover just kind of an overview of the interview process and the timelines we're working with here. I'll have Rachel kind of talk a little bit about the case portion of an interview and what that looks like especially for folks who might not be as familiar with what that is. And then we'll have some questions. So Inspiring Capital has some kind of frequently asked questions and then love to hear your questions as well. So yeah, let's keep this interactive as we get towards the end, and hopefully we will provide a great return on your investment and the time you spend here today with us. Great, so we do have a 3-stage interview process for BPI. That first initial application is due a month from yesterday, so December 18th, 2020. And that is what is available on the Inspiring Capital website. So you can check that out. pretty simple. It's kind of a resume, some basic biographical information. We ask for your professional references up front. Just to level with y'all, we won't check them till kind of we get towards the final round, but it's just easier that way to get everything out at once. And then some short and answer questions, which are essentially the types of kind of things you would put in a cover letter. So we don't ask for an official cover letter, but it's the kind of things like, why do you want to work for the National Park Service for a summer? Those kind of softball questions, and just to kind of get a sense of who you are. So that's the first stage. Shortly after that December date, Inspiring Capital will reach out with a link for you all to do a video interview. So it's a series of short answer questions where they will give you a prompt on the screen. And then, as I recall, there's kind of like a countdown to get yourself all ready, jot some notes down, and then you have a chance to kind of look into the screen and say your response. You do get a couple do-overs, but you know, the important thing is not that you are totally polished in the 90 seconds we give you. It's to kind of get a sense of how you think, how you would approach some of those questions. So that, as I mentioned, will come out after that initial application, and we give you a couple weeks. So those are due early January. I have approximately January 1st. We will not be working on January 1st, so I think it's usually January 2nd or something, just to kind of get those in. So Rachel and I and our team will take a look at all of those. From those, we'll select folks that will proceed to a final round live interview. So we do that over webinar. We've done that the past several years over webinar. It works really well. And I suspect this year people will be even more comfortable with operating over webinar. Kind of do a quick getting to know you, 10, 15 minutes of that. The bulk of it is like about a 40-minute case, which we'll talk about, and then 10 minutes to wrap up. So it's about an hour, and we give you a chance to kind of ask any questions you want there at the end. Let's see, my other notes. So those happen kind of mid-January to mid-February. We make offers on a rolling basis. So hot tip for those of you who are spending the time with us here today. If you get that final round interview invitation, don't sit on it. Go schedule your interview for early, and you'll get an early time slot. Kind of get it off of your plate, and since we do give offers on a rolling basis, it couldn't hurt. And so we hope to have the cohort finalized by early March, depending on how things shake out. Sometimes it's a little later, but that's how it looks. Just to kind of, for your awareness, we are also soliciting projects right now from parks and programs all around the country. And so we will have a tentative final list by that final round interview date of kind of those park and program projects that are in our, that are also kind of final round contenders. So you won't have the full list if you were to be given an offer, but you will have a pretty good sense of what the projects look like, and you'll have time to kind of ask questions and talk that through. All right, so that's a lot of the logistics stuff. The quick information is available on the website, but just kind of wanted to dive in there. I'm happy to answer any questions at the end if you want to know more about what that looks like. All right, so I'm going to hand it over to Rachel. Rachel, I'm going to keep driving, so you just tell me when you want me to advance, but talk a little bit about what a case interview looks like. Awesome.
All right, so a case interview. So, first place that always comes up on the internet, which we're all on all the time, Wikipedia. So what is a case interview? A case interview is a job interview in which the applicant is presented with a challenging business scenario that he or she must investigate and propose a solution to. Consulting firms use case interviews to evaluate candidates' analytical abilities and problem-solving skills, and they're looking not for the correct answer, but for an understanding of how the applicant thinks and how the applicant approaches problems. And I know this is a definition from Wikipedia, but I can't push more on how the case isn't about getting to the right answer. It's about showing how the applicant thinks. I think especially last year in the interview process, I found that if a candidate was really organized and could explain to me how they got X, Y, and Z. Even if their numbers were slightly off, I was able to give them the benefit of the doubt because I was able to understand how they got there. And so because they're organized, it led to a certain amount of trust. And so it's really about getting to how do you think, how can you organize information? How can you take information that's disordered and make it easy to understand and come to a conclusion. So moving forward, Stephen, if you'd like to advance the slide. So what does the case interview look like for the business plan internship? So like Stephen said, the final round interview consists of behavioral questions for about 10 minutes, just getting to know you a little bit more, warming up. And then we'll move into a 40-minute case portion. And then at the end, we'll give you 10 minutes to ask us any questions that are remaining. A lot of times candidates ask about the projects that are available, selection process, things like that. For the case interview, we provide that information verbally via webinar. And the information you can expect to be included from us off the start is an introduction to the park, including some basic information and its key resources, a description of the problem, and what exactly you are expected to solve over the next 40 minutes. What we ask is that you think about the problem and that you pitch a final recommendation or course of action. Usually we're setting it up so that you have to pitch to a superintendent or someone in leadership who doesn't have time to crunch the numbers the way you do. You can use aids. So like it's totally okay to use a calculator, computer, notepad, pencil if you'd like to. Nothing that we present to you is so difficult that you should need Excel. Take that as a really big hint. You don't need to overcomplicate it. You can do everything by pencil and pen on paper, but you will not lose points if you use a calculator or a computer. And so the other thing I'll mention, and it might be on the next slide too, is that we're not trying to trick you. So there's like no part of this where it's like, ooh, plot twist, actually X, Y, Z occurred. We try to give you the information you need to solve the problem. And as you continue to ask us more questions and repeat things back to us, we'll continue to share more information with you that's relevant, as long as you get organized, create a framework, and ask the right questions that you need to answer the problem. Stephen, anything else that we should add here?
Yeah, I think one key point is that we do not expect you to be policy experts. Those of us who work in the National Park Service, we're always learning more policy, or policy is being interpreted in a new way. And so, you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to kind of scour the internet for all that kind of stuff. We do try to base the case on like a real world type problem that faces the Park Service, which I think makes for a more interesting case because, as Rachel said, there's often not an easy right answer. And we're not asking you to kind of like, optimize for revenue or profit or something like that, because that's not how we operate. So we're going to ask you to balance potentially, some competing interests or priorities, and just kind of, given the information that we provide you, how you think about those things.
Yeah. So how to best prepare for the case interview. Here's our best tips and practices. So we recommend that you practice with a classmate or someone in your career service office. Full disclosure, the business plan internship was the first and last case I solved throughout my MBA career, like interview case. So practice, I just practiced with all my friends who are applying to consulting firms, and that's how I was able to nail the case.
Yeah, I also, I am coming from a public policy school background. So I didn't have a ton of experience with the case as well. Actually had a friend who came from a big consulting firm, and I mentioned that I had an interview and that there was a case, and he stopped me. He was like, "We're gonna practice now." And I'm so glad he said that, because I didn't realize kind of all of these tips and kind of how it all works. But he sat down with me, we spent some time going through it, and that was great. So reiterate that one. The second tip I'll give you here is take notes. I mean, I think for one, we'll probably throw some numbers at you pretty quickly, just kind of to get a sense of how you're organizing information. I remember one of the tips my friend gave me was write costs in one corner of the page and write revenue or kind of money coming in on the other side, and and like keep it organized, and that just helps us also see kind of how you're thinking and organizing thoughts. So definitely take notes. You're not going to impress anyone by kind of your memory recall. You might actually worry us.
Yeah, we don't work off of memory here. I have copious notes for every meeting that I have at the job. The next thing I recommend is that you read the problem back to the interview. And when you read it back to the interview, what we're really asking you to do is confirm that you know what the problem is and what you've been asked to solve for. So a lot of times someone will end a case interview and they'll have answered half the question because they didn't really ever confirm the question up front. And we only like dock points off once for something. So we're not just going to run it all the way through, but read the problem back to the interview in the beginning to make sure you know what you're solving for and what we're looking for in a solution.
Cool. Next tip is don't rush. So seen a lot of really great case interviews, seen some ones that weren't so great. The common element, I think, for most of the not so great interviews I've seen, people really trying to rush to get to an answer. You do have a limited amount of time, but like take your time. Again, tell us what you're thinking and how you're thinking about it. If you kind of rush to get to the answer, you will likely kind of make a really silly error somewhere, or kind of jump to a conclusion that we haven't even gotten there yet. Have had a few where we finished laying out the case and someone jumps right into what is the right answer. We're like, whoa, let's take this one step at a time and like think through all of the different considerations. So take it slow, and I think being mindful of the time, but don't rush through it.
And talk it through out loud. So talking it through out loud helps us know what you're thinking and how you're thinking about it so that we don't get lost. If you just like spit numbers back at us and don't explain any of it, like we don't know how you got there, and it's really hard to evaluate how you're organized. That said, if you're someone who needs to like take a minute to like think about it and organize your thoughts, I know I can be a verbal processor, and if I don't stop and think before I talk, I sound like I'm talking in circles. I know it's something I do. So I had to, for case prep, had to learn to say, can I take a minute to think about this? Take a minute, get yourself organized, and then come back and say, all right, here's what I'm thinking about out loud. That's a really great way to get yourself organized, especially if you're feeling nervous, and then be able to explain back in a way that makes sense to your interviewer.
Awesome. Next one, Rachel already hinted at this. Don't rely on Excel or your calculator. Particularly Excel, you could kind of build out all these columns and build out, formulas and all that kind of stuff. We trust that you probably know how to do that, but more likely than not, you will make a mistake somewhere, or we can't see what's happening on your computer screen, and it's really tough to talk us through like a formula in Excel. So jot it down what you're trying to do. Use a calculator, maybe to calculate a 10% growth of interest growth or something like that, and then kind of spit it back to us, but don't rely on those tools too much.
Yeah. And then as you're working through the case, think big picture, but break the problem down into pieces and solve it one piece at a time. And again, this goes back to the very beginning. If you create a framework and break things down, like what Stephen said, by cost, let's say like cost, revenue, and then other considerations, you can always say like, all right, first let's figure out what the costs are and work through that first, and then move on to the revenue. And if there's ever a point where you're not sure where to go, you can always go back to your framework to be like, oh yes, we talked about this 20 minutes ago. I'd like to jump into that now. And so, writing, I keep saying be organized, getting that framework together in the beginning, really important for any case any case interview you're doing, and then breaking that problem down and working through it piece by piece and putting all the pieces together at the end to get the full picture is the best way to work through a case, especially the National Park Service case.
Yeah. Cool. I'm going to tie this next one. Remember your audience. I'm going to tie that into what Rachel was just talking about, big picture stuff. Remember, we are the Park Service. We are not here to run a profit. We are not here to kind of maximize revenue. We're here to fulfill our mission. And so keeping that in the back of your mind, likely the prompt for the case will not be kind of like, which of these generates the most profit? It's never that easy. So we want you to think big picture. Again, there's often no right answer. And so we want to get a sense of how you're weighing all of the different considerations, and just kind of remembering your audience as the National Park Service, and here's just a plug. Familiarize yourself with the mission, just so you kind of get a sense of what that looks and feels like.
And the final one is make a recommendation and support it with your rationale. And so what we're really saying is don't be wishy-washy. Don't be like, well, you could do option 1, you could do option 2, or you could do option 3. We know that because we presented the problem to you. What we really want is a recommendation based off of the calculations you've done and the problem that you've worked through. In the National Park Service, when we do, client engagements with parks here, we work hard to make sure we can give the best information to superintendents to make data-driven strategic decisions. And the more we're able to tell them this is the best move this year, the better off that park will be. And so in this case, we want to make sure that you can make a recommendation to those, to park leadership, especially because if you're accepted into the program, you will in fact be making recommendations to the park leadership wherever you're placed. And there's a good chance that whatever your recommendations are will impact millions of dollars within that location. And so those are our best tips and best practices. I hope you guys have written those down. They're nothing that you probably wouldn't find if you're doing research, but definitely things to keep in mind as you're applying.
Excellent. So we made it to the questions portion. I think I'll stop sharing, as beautiful as this photo is. Get the big faces back on my screen anyway. Yeah, Nicolette, I think you had some frequently asked questions for us, and then we can turn it over to you all on camera.
For sure. So thanks, Rachel and Stephen, for kind of dropping those gems to prospective candidates, right? Super exciting. We're now going to kind of dive into some frequently asked questions. So I do ask the audience, if you guys have some questions that you're dying to ask, we are going to open it up for you guys to ask questions at around 5:50, and we may actually cover them within this session now, okay? So let's kind of do a deep dive. So the first question that I think people may be dying to know are, what are the top qualities that you guys typically look for? And also, I would say that you find deemed successful in a candidate.
Sure, I'll take first stab at this, Rachel, if you don't mind.
You go for it.
Yeah, so I think I tell people, especially as we kind of just really focused a lot on the case, I think I mentioned I come from a public policy background. I was a little intimidated by applying to something that was the business plan internship. I was the kind of thinking, whoa, I might be out of my element here. First I'll say that we definitely, the policy background, environmental management background, that's also a great part of what we're looking for. And we would typically look to match you up in teams with complementary skills. So don't let that hold you back if you're coming from a background more similar to mine. And the second thing I'll say is that with regards to kind of the model, like business modeling or something, that was something where I was like, I don't know the first thing about that. And then I started this internship, and my co-consultant was like, oh no, all you do is you're planning for the future, you're just planning it out over many years. And I was like, oh, I get it. That's cool. I can do that. Really what we're looking for in the case is kind of people who can cross that threshold. We're not necessarily, you're not gonna be held to a standard where you're doing really complex models or anything like that. We want people who are comfortable with data, comfortable with numbers, and comfortable kind of telling a story with that. Often that change management piece is just as important as the data analytics that you might do. So I think that's a huge piece. The other kind of quality I'd say is folks who are approaching this as a learning opportunity. You're going to get a chance to learn a ton about the Park Service and how it works. And so just kind of approaching it with humility, and every day, what else new can I learn? And kind of how can I wrap my head around all of these policy regulations and everything else. So I think having both the kind of confidence that you can do this and you're going to provide great recommendations, but also the humility to kind of ask anyone the stupid question at any time. That's what you're there for.
I think I'd add two other small things that we look for in candidates. So when you are applying, even when you're accepted, you might not know where you're going yet. So we need candidates who are flexible and who are okay with that. And some folks aren't okay with that, and we respect that. But we need to know that if you say yes, you're cool if you get your first choice park or your fourth choice park. Usually we're able to get people to, I want to say like their top 4 parks. That's why I say that like that. So like that flexibility really matters. And even pre-COVID, there's always, like national parks some of them are extremely remote, and yeah, you're not going to be living in fancy places if you're working for the National Park Service. And so just having some flexibility and some grace for wherever, for your location, and knowing that you are, yeah, that's the type of summer you're looking for. Again, nothing like my National Park Service summer, nothing like terrible happened. But I lived in a place where I had to hike cliffs to get groceries, and I was fine with that. It's what I wanted. And the last thing I mentioned too is an ability to work independently. So again, even pre-COVID, we as the project managers are not on site with you. We expect you to run the project independently, and we touch base with you at least once a week, more if that's what you decide with your project manager. But we expect you to not only do the analysis, but manage the stakeholders in the park and represent the group well. And so there's a certain amount of independence that we need for that, to know that we can put you in any of the national parks that are trusting us to help solve problems for them this summer.
Yep. I'll also tag onto that in case you just thought of like climbing up cliffs with groceries is maybe a little too much to you. No. Great location. People were loving that one. We also work with our program offices, which might be in DC, or we have a whole series of regional offices as well. And so, they are looking for the same skill sets. So we typically have a good mix of kind of very rural parks, a little bit less rural parks, and then program offices working kind of with Washington level leadership or regional level leadership as well. So it's a whole mix, and we're looking to match people up where they can kind of best provide value to the National Park Service.
Thanks for catching that, Stephen.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of different qualities that make a really great candidate. And I mean, hiking up a mountain, each to own. It does sound fun though. It's an experience, right? We're going through everything at this point. So kind of we took a look at the qualities, and now kind of jumping into, we talked a little bit about it, but the backgrounds that you guys kind of see the typical applicant applying. Each of you guys have kind of spoke about that, there isn't a typical one, but if you guys could name a couple, just so people in the audience, if they fit it or if they don't fit it, to kind of see that there's room for them as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think the Inspiring Capital website does a pretty good job kind of showing the basic, the non-starters or the absolute requirements. So you have to be a current grad student. Typically we see people in business, policy, or environmental management studies types of schools. But over the years, this will be the 23rd year of operation. We've seen people from all different backgrounds, PhD programs, you name it. So, but you do have to be a grad student that is kind of fully enrolled during the summer, which means if you are graduating in spring of 2021, unfortunately you're ineligible for the program. So just to kind of cover that. Yeah, I mentioned a little bit about the school backgrounds. I think we're looking for people who, how do I say this? I think it's less about your background and more about your interests and kind of how you approach things. So, we're looking for, as Rachel mentioned, problem solvers, people who are ready to tackle maybe an ambiguous problem. And maybe a problem where you have to kind of figure out the path forward. You have a lot of autonomy to set kind of the project timeline and kind of the plan for how you're going to achieve that. And so if you are the type of person that is kind of looking for something on a platter to like, here's what I need you to do, get back to me at the end of the day with these numbers crunched, it's not that kind of internship. It's very much like, here's what we need to do over the next 10 weeks. How are we going to get there? You're now on the ground. You tell me. So. Yeah.
Great. And then I think we can kind of go into our next question in terms of the actual, like the case study that we're all talking about, right? And so if you guys could kind of highlight what you guys are evaluating, just some key things that you're looking for to kind of put emphasis on.
I think I can jump in here. So I think like at a high level, and I think even reflecting back to last year's cases, the ones where afterward I was like, wow, that went really well. That candidate was really good. I hope that whoever evaluates my interview with them also thinks that, because we as a team double evaluate everyone who makes it to the third round. I think, again, I've mentioned this many times now, so I'll just say it again. Organization, building that framework out so that we can follow is really important. I can't, again, stress that enough. So we look at that. We do pay attention to the numbers, and we'll notice where numbers aren't correct, and you'll get a little tick, like we'll notice it. And then at the end, if your numbers are slightly off, we're not going to like tick through the whole way to be like, well, they still have that number wrong. Like what we adjust if something's slightly off, and acknowledge that, you know, when you're working with us during the summer, we're going to check work. We don't expect everything to be perfect the first time. So we pay attention to that. And then in the end, again, we pay attention to if you ask for any other information that's not related to finance, if you start to dig around to try to understand the broader context. Again, a lot of in my 1 year of experience working for the National Park Service, I feel like the issue that we have isn't always money. You know, maybe we could always use more money. It's more a matter of like where that money is tied to, and who donated it, and what do they want it used for, and what can we do with it, and what are the stakeholders who are involved with this one. And so, you know, demonstrating that you have curiosity outside of the finance, that sticks out to me. And then the final thing, again, is making that recommendation and supporting it confidently with your rationale. I'd say those are the three or four things that, like, at a high level, if you can do those things well, it makes one or two math errors here or there, makes you less worried, because I know that you're the type of person who is organized enough to likely go back and be like, oh, I messed that up, or be able to have your manager point out like, hey, can you double check that number? I'm not sure about it. Stephen, anything you would add?
Yeah, I think and you kind of touched on this, the keeping in mind the big picture. So like the numbers are a piece of it, and then everything that comes after that. And so we'll often talk to people who, and don't get me wrong, like doing a case is not the easiest thing in the world. So like we give some latitude, but we'll talk to people who kind of know that they should ask about all this stuff on the onset, like kind of ask about, you know, well, what are the implications on the natural resources, or, you know, where are the museum services going to move? And by the end, they totally forget it because they're so focused on the numbers. I think if you can balance those things and tie it back in, and even kind of like show that you get how this all fits together into a web, you know, maybe the fact that building a new facility is going to take more people to staff it, and where's that money coming from, and kind of how you're managing that workforce challenge. Those are things that may not be in the case at all, but to just kind of hear you think through all of those considerations, that's kind of what makes a case really stick out in our mind, is like they really got it. They saw kind of how this would really be like a real life problem. It's not just a math problem.
Thanks for the response, both. The next thing we kind of want to talk about in terms of the case study, speaking about the tips that you guys kind of walked through on your slide, anything else regarding that individuals should read prior? Do you guys have any suggestions regarding that before walking into the case study?
I think the one thing I did, and the one thing I've told candidates who've reached out to me personally in the past, is just that, like, if I know most MBA programs have this, and I'm going to make an assumption maybe MPP programs have it too, is like a consulting club. And the big thing I say, at least if the case is something that's making you nervous, like just go to a couple of sessions, like just work with some folks. It's going to be like, if you've never done it before, it's going to feel kind of uncomfortable and weird. And there's always going to be someone who's really good at, like, you know, market guessing what the market size is of how many fire hydrants are in like San Francisco. I personally don't know that off the top of my head. So there's always me, that person. If you're that person, you're amazing. Go you.
Literally.
Yeah. It's not my skill. I don't have those stats memorized. That's not the type of stuff we're looking for, but just that ability to get used to that framework and practice staying cool under pressure if you're feeling uncomfortable, if the case study is something that makes you a little bit nervous.
Yep. I would add, bounce around on nps.gov. That's our website. Check it out. We have information about, our mission, which is really about balancing recreation and kind of visitor use with conserving and preserving these natural and cultural resources, which, again, there's no right answer where you draw that line or how you interpret that. But likely the case and just kind of how we're thinking will reflect that tension. And so the better you kind of internalize, this is what the National Park Service does, the more you'll be kind of ready to approach those questions.
Awesome. Really great reads then, or websites that people want to look into. I think before we kind of open it up for the students to ask questions, are there any last final words of wisdom that you guys would like to give to candidates regarding the application process, the case interview?
Yeah, I'll go first. I was just reviewing one of the earlier kind of alumni panels that the Inspiring Capital hosted. And I think it was Paige who mentioned, like, on those video responses, like, you get a couple do-overs, but like, then that's it. And I think, like, she just kind of said, like, I think like she got caught by surprise and was just like, oh, okay, we're rolling, here we go. And, but it was totally genuine. And like, obviously it was fine. Like, and I think we're looking for a sense of, we want people who are going to be professional, present themselves well. You're representing us to our colleagues, out in parks or in program offices. But we also are looking for people who are going to be genuine, who are going to make connections with people. Robots don't make great connections. And so, like, don't worry too much about, like, if you stumble over a word, all of that kind of stuff. Like, we're just trying to get a sense of who you are. And I think just being your true, genuine self is always the best way to go.
Yeah. And then I think the only other thing I would add, and I feel like this was on a slide at some point, Steve, I don't know where it went, but it's really good for you to get to know the National Park Service mission so you can talk about it, connect with it more, and tie it into the case. You will not get any extra points for knowing our the names of all 422 sites, or trivia, the largest park in the lower 48 states. It's Death Valley. I think. I'm suddenly wondering if yes, it is. I had to double check that. We have trivia at team meetings. So you won't get any extra points for that. If you know that stuff, that's really great, but know that, like, you don't need to sweat over, like, having trivia together and knowing those types of things, or sending many emails to anyone on the hiring team also. It's not something that will get you any extra credit.
Yeah, and I think to that point, thanks for bringing that up, Rachel. Like,
sure.
We love hearing, like, oh yeah, I went to this national park and it was great. Like, you're not going to get extra points also for going on, like, I went on this epic road trip and I hit 22 parks and I did this, and that. Like, cool. How does that relate to, like, what you want to do this summer and how this fits your professional goals? Like, I love doing that stuff as well. You don't need to work for the Park Service to really enjoy that. And so even if you've never been to a national park site, which you probably find out in the course of the interview, like, you have and you just didn't know it, we'll tell you, and, like, that's cool. Like, what we're looking for are people who are really into that mission. And so we're preserving natural places, we're preserving cultural resources and kind of culturally significant places. And really our role is as the public historians for the country and preserving those stories. And so, people who kind of get that regardless of their experience in the Park Service is kind of, what we're looking for. There's no bonus points awarded for, like, frequent flyers.
It goes a little bit longer.
And likely your interviewer will kind of, like, you kind of read them a little bit. If you've got some more kind of catching up to do, they'll probably try to, like, okay, let's keep it moving. It is kind of on you to watch the clock. But, by the time you get through kind of outlining all the information, taking some notes, all that kind of stuff, you know, you're moving along. Yeah, 30, 40 minutes.
Awesome. We now have another question from Emily.
Hi guys, thanks for the great presentation. I'm Emily Chave. I'm an executive MBA student in Georgetown, which is a different kind of schedule than I'm guessing most of my friends on the call are on, because it's a year-round program. And so I'm curious, I'm getting a read that there isn't a lot of flexibility in the daily and weekly demands of this program, which I respect. I'm curious if there might be parallel programs or other ways to contribute to the Park Service that you would recommend that I look into. That would be shorter duration, part-time, remote, based in DC, any of the above.
Yep, sure.
For a long-time fan.
Yeah, I mean, so yes, it is. It's a very intense kind of full-time gig. You know, off the top of my head, I would say, especially since you're based in DC, well, in normal times, you know, there's often different opportunities with a whole bunch of parks in the DC area, as well as DC office. The one place I'd just take a look at on our website is like our partnerships directorate. Not only do they kind of partnerships and volunteers, they work with volunteers, which might be a great place for you to kind of get plugged in, but often they're looking for help doing those kind of things. So off the top of my head, that's the best I could give you. Often it means interfacing with like specific parks who may not know exactly what they need either. So sometimes there's an easy fit, sometimes it takes a little digging.
Thank you.
Sure.
Awesome. We have another question coming in from Scott. And then Brady, you can go after.
Hi, my name is Scott Menser at the Tepper School of Business at Carnegie Mellon. My question is general, like what, if you could name or talk about like your favorite project that you've worked on while you've been with the National Park Service, I think it'd be really awesome to hear that.
There's just been so many good ones. I love working with parks.
The fact that this is being recorded, and I don't want to make anyone upset. Yeah, it's a good question.
Steven, I can jump in and share one.
Yeah, you go first, okay. Rachel.
So I'm not sure that this is my favorite, but it's one I'm really excited about because I'm closing out this project in the next month. So our team, the business management group is the team that manages the BPI internship, and we're more or less internal consultants for the National Park Service. So we've been working with the Washington housing team to think about better ways to look at National Park Service housing, or the housing that the National Park Service has for employees. Let's say for like in very rural areas where there's no other space to live, you might live in National Park Service housing, or during the summer, if you're hired with us, you'll likely live in National Park Service housing. And so essentially what we were able to do over the last few months was create a tool where all you have to do is you can drop in all the data for the National Park Service and click 3 buttons, and you can know the utilization for any given park that has housing and determine what the utilization is of that housing. And that tool will be used for higher level leadership will use that tool to determine if parks need to move forward to get more housing, or if they should invest in the current housing they have to improve their utilization. So to me, I'm super excited about this project because it has, something that I've been working on in Denver, and if executed well, it should have impacts across the service and hopefully save a lot of money and help parks solve problems faster, since new construction can take a while.
Thanks, Rachel. Scott, I'll hop in now that I've had a chance to think. Yeah, don't know that it's my favorite, but one project that I really enjoyed serving as the project manager for, it was a BPI project a few summers ago at the Grand Canyon. And so my team of consultants was really tasked with the question of how the Grand Canyon was going to manage backcountry backpacking authorizations. So essentially, we have these things, commercial use authorizations. If you're a company who leads like backpacking trips or kayaking trips or whatever, you can apply for one of those. And basically they had to not only look at the kind of like the financial analysis of what was happening with those authorizations, but kind of weigh, are we letting too many people kind of go on these commercial backpacking trips that might degrade the resource or affect kind of the visitor experience? You know, if it feels like you're walking through Central Park, like no knock on Central Park, love Central Park, but like that maybe isn't what people are looking for when they go on a backpacking trip through the Grand Canyon. And so, you know, what is the appropriate number kind of to maintain that? How do they balance who gets those authorizations? Making sure that it's equitable and transparent, all those sorts of things. So it was started out with a pretty basic questions like, how are we going to manage this? And it really, they dove into kind of a full tearing apart the process. What does it look like? What are the touch points involved? Who are the stakeholders, and kind of what are their interests? And so I think it ended up being a really cool project because they got to really touch every piece of how the park operates, you know, from the kind of business services to natural resources, to our kind of law enforcement search and rescue folks who are like, you know, these are the cases we see, you know, here's who's getting into trouble. If we had our way, like, you know, we'd make sure all of these folks were better prepared, so that they could really do that.
Awesome. I think we can take our next question from Brady.
Hey guys, thanks for doing this. I'm Brady at the Keenan Flagler Business School, University of North Carolina. So in the spirit of a market setting case question, can you maybe walk us through the funnel? You know, how many applications you're expecting in December, and then how many do you think you'll interview in January, and how many do we actually get tagged for the job?
Sure, I think I'm probably best suited to answer this one, Rachel. I'll tell you this, we already have about 50 applications in hand for this coming year. So if you were worried about like being the awkward first one to the party, don't worry, get your application in now. We typically see somewhere between 200 and 300 applicants a year. Yeah, I think that's typical for a normal year. The kind of our goal is over 300, and we're usually right around there. We then kind of whittle those down. Typically, we'd be looking kind of to do 60 to 80 final interviews. So kind of end of January, all of February, our team is really cranking away at interviews to get all those in. And then, you know, we make offers. One of the things we're trying to do is really nail that acceptance rate for the offers. I'd say it's usually between 50 and 75%. So we're probably giving out like 30 to 40 offers. But we've been kind of trying to make sure that we get a better funnel, so that typically the people who make it to that final round or accept are really self-selecting. You know, it takes some special folks who are willing to climb up a cliff with groceries. And so, you know, the people who are ready to really kind of go anywhere over the summer, that's great. So sometimes that final offer is that funnel. Excuse me for the background noise. But yeah, so that's kind of what we're looking at. And then the final cohort is usually between 16 and 18. I don't think I mentioned that earlier. So by the time we get to that 16 and 18, it's folks that we're really excited about, and a really cool group of people.
Great. I think we have another question from, and I apologize if I butcher your name, Olesa?
It's Alessia.
Alessia, there we go.
I'm Alessia. I'm a Darden student. And Rachel, I'm just really curious, in which park you had to climb over the cliff to get your
Yeah, I asked. No, I was like, someone please ask me where I was located. No, so I was in Kalaupapa National Historic Park in Hawaii, and so it's the Kalaupapa Peninsula off of Molokai. And they did fly some vegetables in. It's just sometimes the vegetables didn't come in, and so when the vegetables didn't come in, you'd have to go and get more vegetables. But we also had, 2 consultants in Lexington, Massachusetts this summer. We had a group of consultants in Denver. Some consultants in Pearl Harbor. So I absolutely wanted to live in this location. It was like my number one choice.
Nothing beats Hawaii. I mean, right? We have a couple other questions. I'm going to let Michaela and then Grace, you can go right after.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for talking with us today. I was just curious if you guys could speak a little bit to kind of what the culture is like working for the National Park Service and how it's like working in your teams as kind of internal consultants.
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that first one. So the National Park Service, it is the federal government. Kind of newsflash, in case you weren't aware. And so I think there is sometimes it's sometimes frustrating that things might move slower than you'd expect or whatever. That all is pretty typical. I think one of the interesting things or the notable things about the National Park Service is that the workforce is really committed to the mission. And I think that is, one of the things that drew me to working for the Park Service. Wherever you go, you will find people who are totally committed to what they're doing. And you kind of find kind of buffs in every field, whether it's like, Civil War buffs or people who, spent their whole lives focusing on one type of, Kentucky cave shrimp. I spent my summer in Kentucky at Mammoth Cave and learned all about cave shrimp. So you really get people who are passionate about what they're doing. I think that would be my pitch. Kind of what the workforce is like. And then our team, we kind of get to wade in all these different areas. So Rachel, I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, I think our team, like Stephen said, so we get to, what I personally love about working for the National Park Service in my current role and in this role is that we get to work at the national, regional, and local level and get to sort of dip our fingers in everything and see what are the real problems that folks are facing on the ground, what's keeping parks from being able to fully implement their mission, and then also being at the DC level to be like, all right, how could we interpret policy so that park staff can actually get stuff done? Like, how can we make sure that we interpret this so that no one's confused, things get done? So I personally really love that, and I feel like our team is made up of someone who's newer like me. I joined a year ago, to folks who have been. Right now we have 2 people on the team who have been in the National Park Service for like 10 plus years, and they know everyone and everything. And whenever I have a question, I can go to them and be like, hey, what's going on here? Can you explain this policy to me, or at least give me direction on where to go? So I feel like our team is super well-rounded in that sense. And then if you're to work with us this summer, I think one thing that's, in my opinion, really wonderful about being a BPI consultant is that you don't have to, where there's barriers or where there could be issues, we as project managers seek to bring those, break down barriers for you. So if it's a data issue that's a problem or certain things, we try to resolve some of that stuff so that you don't have to spend your time wrangling things that don't need to be wrangled. You only have 10 weeks. And so we really work to scope the project so you have to deal with, you will not leave the summer being like, wow, federal government, or it's unlikely you'll leave the summer like that. Like, I don't think we've had any consultants leave to be like, ooh, sheesh. Because we really work through, getting some of those issues taken care of for you.
Yeah, and Rachel mentioned it, it is for a organization of about 20,000 people, it is a small world. And so being part of the BPI program really opens up doors, because you're it's 3 degrees separation, if at most, from anyone. Which is a really great thing about, you can just kind of email someone and say hey, so-and-so told me to talk to you. And they're like, oh, they're great. And, you're in. So that's a cool thing about working in the Park Service.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. We're going to let Grace ask a question, and then Dana will be our last one for the session.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Stephen and Rachel, for organizing this conversation. I'm from the University of Virginia Darden School of Business, but just kind of wanted to ask, I noticed both of you were in the BPI internship program and now are with the business management group. So I'm just curious how frequently people who complete the program return to the National Park Service, and if they normally return into that business management group, or if there's other avenues as well that you see people kind of graduate into.
Stephen, I feel like you know our numbers right now. You should just
so
take it.
the last few years, kind of between, I would say kind of our rate of recruiting folks from BPI into the Park Service, which is something we're definitely trying to do. That's a reason this present program exists, is usually between kind of 18 and 25% of the class. Kind of, yeah, based on a lot of external factors. People definitely join up, and lots of avenues. Rachel, you can speak to that. I joined the Park Service, I'll just say, I joined a regional office. Was originally working in Boston before moving out here to Denver and with the business management group. So yeah, all different sorts of opportunities.
Yeah, and we just hired someone from my class who's also a veteran. He is living, was it Kenai Forest? He's in Alaska. He had quite a trip to Alaska. So he's in Alaska. We have folks in DC this year. We have another person who was hired to work for the social sciences group that I didn't even know existed until she applied for it in Colorado, to be completely honest. We have someone who I know is trying to find a job at Grand Teton. And so, yeah, depending on what you're looking for, you can likely find a role within the 2 years that you have hiring status. And I think Stephen mentioned this, but I'll say it. I think what I've noticed is that the folks who want to who do a good job with the business plan internship, if you want to work for the National Park Service after graduation and you work with us and you get your ducks in a row, there's a pretty good chance you will. My co-consultant isn't working for the National Park Service because she wanted to go back to McKinsey. One of the interns one of the consultants I managed this summer isn't going to work for the National Park Service because he wants to go back to his consulting firm. So I think what we're seeing is that folks who want to, you have a really high percentage chance that you'll get a job that you want. And folks who don't want to, you're going to have a really great experience, and you will always have a special connection to the National Park Service from that. And always everyone stays an advocate in one way or the other.
Thanks, guys. And then our last question for the session, you can take it away, Grace.
Oh, maybe. Thank you. Yeah. I think maybe it's.
Oh, I mean, Dana, sorry.
Sorry.
No worries.
Hey, my name's Dana. I'm also at UVA Darden. I'd love to hear you all, if you don't mind, talking a little bit to the current state of the National Park Service. My most recent job, I worked at an aquarium, and we in the entire industry, the museum industry, has been hit incredibly hard by COVID-19 and obviously so many of the things surrounding it. And so I'm curious if you don't mind speaking to what are the most pressing things happening right now in the National Park Service, and how do you see those trends impacting the summer internship? How's that impacted your roles and your sort of top priorities as a group?
Sure. Take first stab at that. Yeah, I mean, so the immediate COVID response is a big one, and it's hard to look past that. And I think, in terms of how it's affecting the Park Service, there's no kind of one answer. So we've seen, I mean, yeah, you're at UVA. Shenandoah is blowing up in terms of visitation. Everyone's leaving DC area, wants to get away, wants to get out into nature. And so, big natural parks have seen actually an increase in visitation over these past few months, which, kind of creates some issues. Other issues were that the Park Service waived entrance fees for a number of months there. And so as visitation was ramping back up, we weren't collecting that revenue that some of our operations depend on. So what are we going to do? That may hit our desks. Kind of how do we respond to that? And then you have kind of small historic sites that I was just speaking to regional director who pointed out yeah, these big, great, natural parks are great. No one really wants to go to a enclosed 18th century house with no ventilation, where that's tiny. Like those cultural sites are really struggling right now. And so what does that mean? Like, what does that look like? Do we have to have kind of some conversations about how we are allocating resources to kind of respond to that, since it has kind of turned everything on its head. So yeah, that's what jumps to mind for me. That said, it's kind of a super exciting time to be in the Park Service, I think, because as an organization, I think often we can kind of be slow to change. There's a lot of history, and people love that history. And COVID has done nothing but like strip away all of those those barriers to change. And so I think people are increasingly acknowledging like the way we've always done things may not work. And so kind of what is the best way to do things and the best way to accomplish our mission. So for folks in our position, that's really exciting to kind of to think through all of those considerations.
Great. And
oh, sorry.
Oh yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just going to add for the internship in terms of implications. My apologies. I'm happy this is being recorded just for that reason. We work really hard to make sure everyone is safe and able to do their projects. So as we're vetting candidates, we're also vetting projects and making sure that we have projects that are viable even during the pandemic. And right now cases are at an all-time high. We as a team are not traveling. We don't have any trips on the book anytime soon. We're not even really talking about it for our team stuff. Hopefully by the summer things will look better, and hopefully we'll be able to look at what it looks like to send folks to parks, things like that. But just so you know, we work with, we pay attention to the news, we watch the numbers, and we make sure that we're putting folks in situations where they're safe and where they're able to do their job well.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Stephen and Rachel, for really taking the time to speak to these students. And I also want to thank the students for attending this session. Hopefully you guys, you walk away and apply. Like we stated earlier, the first deadline to apply is December 18th. So putting that on your radar. Don't want to keep you guys any more longer, but do thank you. And I hope everyone has a great night. Okay.
Thanks for joining, everyone.
Thanks, you guys. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.